And welcome, everyone. Happy to see so many people turned out this afternoon. I'd like to start out by saying that given the news of the last couple of weeks, if you're an executive vice president at Booz Allen Hamilton, you're awful happy to be here in Aspen rather than in Washington, D.C. I think the only guy who might be happier would be the acting commissioner of the IRS. The topic this afternoon is a complex one, and what I'd like to do is set it up before introducing our amazing panelist here. Over the last 20 years, the field of diplomacy has undergone rapid and drastic changes due to the changing global environment and internal forces in Washington. This changing context is marked in part by a decade of war and reconstruction in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Arab Spring, Iran, and most recently the events that took place in Benghazi this past September, and all of the political instability that's resulted. A diffusion of power and the rise of new regional players and non-state actors, and then on top of that, the global economic crisis and the increasing fiscal constraints both on the Defense Department, on the nation at large, and on the State Department. And at the same time, the explosion of new technologies, increased internet and mobile penetration, and widespread popularity of social media require that our diplomats ask new questions and address new challenges. More importantly, interconnectivity has significantly shortened the cycle time associated with diplomatic activities. Everything needs to be done fast. Yet one thing has fundamentally not changed, and that's the definition of power, which is quite simply the ability to affect others to get the outcomes that you want. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton commented that we must use what has been called smart power, the full range of tools at our disposal. With smart power, diplomacy will be the vanguard of foreign policy. It involves the intelligent use of all the elements of national power from across government and the private sector. These include diplomatic, economic, military, political, financial, informational, legal, and cultural components. The trick is having and using the right combination of tools in each situation. So issue by issue, the key is striking the right balance between the hard, more coercive tools of national power with its softer tools that Hillary Clinton addressed above. The theory of the case is that we have traditionally over-relied on hard power and underused soft power, and it's pretty clear that we have not gotten the sustainable outcomes that we want. So we're going to explore this a little bit with a panel that couldn't be more experienced in these issues. I apologize in advance for the brevity of the bios, but all of these folks are very well known. Start out with Madeleine Albright, the 64th U.S. Secretary of State, former UN ambassador, trustee of the Aspen Institute, and chair of the Albright Stonebridge Group and the Albright Capital Management, LLC. She also teaches a course on national security tools at Georgetown University. David Ensor has served as director of the Voice of America since 2011. He joined the Voice of America after an extensive career in journalism and communications, including many years as a correspondent at CNN, ABC News, and NPR. From 2010 to 2011, he served as director of communications and public diplomacy at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. And finally, Joe Nye is University Distinguished Service Professor and former Dean of the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He served as an Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, was chair of the National Intelligence Council, and serves as Deputy Undersecretary of State. His most recent books include Presidential Leadership and the Creation of the American Era, and Soft Power and the Powers to Lead. He is widely credited with coining the term smart power and has created the intellectual framework around it. With that, I'd like to open with a question first, and I think it's Madeleine, something that everybody in this room would like an answer to. You were among the many things that you're famous for was the fact that you used your jewelry box as kind of a diplomatic arsenal. And this was widely believed to signal to whoever you were meeting for what the message was that was coming. And you even wrote a book on this, Read My Pins, Stories from a Diplomat's Jewel Box. I think what everybody in this room wants to know is, was that hard power or soft power? Did you answer that question?
Well, let me just say, I wouldn't have done or had a collection of any kind if it hadn't been for Saddam Hussein. And what happened was that I had gone to the United Nations in February '93, right after the Gulf War, and I was an instructed ambassador. And the issue was the ceasefire after the Gulf War had been translated into a series of sanctions resolutions, and my job was to make sure that the sanctions stayed on. So my instructions were to say perfectly terrible things about Saddam Hussein constantly, which he deserved. He'd invaded Kuwait. So all of a sudden a poem appeared in the papers in Baghdad comparing me to many things, but among them an unparalleled serpent. So I had a snake pin. So I wore the snake pin when we were talking about Iraq in the Security Council, and probably somebody from CNN zeroed in and said, "Why are you wearing that snake pin?" And I said, "Because Saddam Hussein compared me to an unparalleled serpent." And then I thought, well, this is fun. So I went out and I bought a lot of costume jewelry that on good days I wore flowers and butterflies and balloons, and on bad days, large insects and carnivorous animals. But people got the message, and one of the people, I have to say, was Leah Rabin. And this pin that I have on today is a copy of a pin she gave me. The real one is in the show that is traveling around. And so whenever I gave a speech on the Middle East, I always wore the dove pin. And then one time I arrived in Jerusalem, and there was a necklace of doves with a note from her that said it takes more than one dove to make peace in the Middle East. So.
Okay, what I'd like to do now, and maybe we could start with you, Joe, and the other panelists could chime in. I mean, you started all this 15 or 20 years ago, this soft power, smart power stuff. How are we doing? How's the evolution of diplomacy kept pace with these massive shifts that we see going on in the 21st century?
Well, I think we're still behind the curve. Basically, if we're living in a global information age, you could argue that the mix of soft power is going to play a larger role. Doesn't mean hard power is finished. Carrots and sticks will always be crucial. But it does mean that in the mix of power resources that Hillary called using your whole toolbox, those that are related to information are probably going to increase in importance. And I think it's had a strong effect on diplomacy. You could, to oversimplify it, say there's 19th century diplomacy, which is diplomacy 1.0, where cabinet diplomacy, two foreign secretaries talk to each other secretly. And then there's 20th century diplomacy, let's call it diplomacy 2.0, in which it's not just a government talking to another government, but it's a government talking to the people of another country, trying to get them to influence the other government. And diplomacy 3.0, the 21st century, is a diplomacy which goes from people to people as a way to try to influence both governments. And I don't think we've quite caught up with that third form. We have done some things. For example, when Hillary Clinton was secretary, she tried to promote the use of Twitter among diplomats. One of the problems with this is that as you use social media to try to get your message across, it's a little bit like a generalization of Madeleine's pins, you find that it's hard to control. And there was a case this past year where an American State Department officer assigned to the embassy in Cairo tweeted about the events of 9/11 2012 and said that it was a mob irritated by the American film that was an anti-Muslim film. Later, it turned out that that was more complex as a story. But the question is, political opponents then use that to punish the administration. So what do you do if you're trying to run diplomacy in a 3.0 world where if you say you must clear your tweets in the State Department before you can tweet, that's not a 3.0 world. We haven't quite coped with that yet. We're still behind the curve of figuring out how do we do this. In addition, there's another problem, which is, and I'll shut up with this, which is in that traditional cabinet diplomacy, the secret diplomacy still remains important. If you want to negotiate a deal on Iran, for example, what do you do when any individual can become a self-appointed savior of the nation and disclose classified information? How are your interlocutors going to trust you, and how are you going to have frank conversations when you can have WikiLeaks? It's not that stealing State Department cables was new, but 250,000 at a coup, that's a different world. So I think we're still behind the curve.
I was in Kabul, Afghanistan, doing public diplomacy, and I must say, understandably, a lot of the embassy was focused on the palace, had to be. But I felt that, and I still feel, that some of the things we were doing to try to reach out to the Afghan people and to help them build their country are going to have more value and help our country, the United States, to achieve its goals more effectively than all that time spent worrying about Hamid Karzai's mood swings. So I feel like you, Joe, that we haven't got the balance right yet. We need to be doing more to converse with foreign publics. In the elections, the Iranian elections the other day, Voice of America, which has about a 20% share, 1 in 5 Iranian adults watches VOA television every week, and probably it was higher election week. We had hundreds of thousands of tweets and Facebook exchanges with interested Iranians about the election. That kind of conversation, and it was a conversation, I thought had tremendous power and made us a place that people came to talk about what they felt about who should win the election and what it would mean for U.S.-Iranian relations.
Madeleine, you teach a course around this. You've got a lot of experience. And how do you feel about this use of social media as a diplomatic tool?
Well, I start out the course by saying that foreign policy is just trying to get some other country to do what you want. And so the question is, what are the tools? And the toolbox is, as Hillary described it, and what you need is, especially in a democracy, is to have an educated population. In many ways, diplomacy, I'll probably regret saying this, but diplomacy is much harder when you had a democratic government than if you're authoritarian. And so part of the issue is because in diplomacy you want to have some control over what you're saying to the other person and hope that something that you've negotiated will actually then come to pass. And so what you do want is a population that understands what you're trying to do, and you try to get your own population to understand it, and you also try, as you both, all the three of you have said, is to have that kind of people-to-people contact so that there can be support on the other side. I think the issue is complicated in the following way, which is that diplomacy actually takes a little bit of time. And one of the hardest parts when you're sitting there on top of the diplomatic machinery is some information will come in over whatever, Twitter, CNN, and you have to immediately make some response to it. And the bottom line is sometimes you can't do it. And if you say no comment is like we've already screwed up, or there's no way to say no comment without having it have a pejorative approach to it. But the question is how, given that we want more and more open societies, we could mobilize this incredible social media in order for a force of good of having an educated population, rather than one where you get kind of assorted messages, the one that Joe mentioned, that provide the wrong information. The thing that I think anybody that has served in the government will say is the first information that comes in is usually wrong. And so then the question is, if it comes in from a lot of different sources, there's more wrongs than rights.
So, if you're the Secretary of State, if you're the public affairs officer in Kabul, and you've got all this going on, how do you control all this?
Well, you don't. You have to keep an eye on it. The problem is you have to decide whether to be part of a public conversation or not. We sat in the embassy watching blogs and Twitter feeds and discussions on the internet of one kind or another between Afghans and trying to decide, and many times with errors of fact in them about the United States and its policy, and you had to decide whether to engage or not. And there's so many of them, you know, how junior do you go to authorize people to just start talking on the internet on behalf of the United States? You really just have to use a kind of common sense approach, and you have to trust your people.
But you have to do it, right?
But you have to be ready for them to make mistakes. I do think you have to do it, yes.
Yeah, I think what Dave just said is extremely important. You've got to be willing to make mistakes and accept criticism. In an information age, the scarcest thing is attention, and attention goes to credibility. And credibility is enhanced not by more hours of broadcasting, but by criticism, self-criticism. The BBC gets terrific answers in terms of polling about is it watched, is it believed, because it's able to bite the hand that feeds it. And the extent to which we punish people who tweet and get the answer wrong, State Department officials, or the extent that Congress punishes VOA for making a statement that's critical of American policy, it's self-defeating. So control is the wrong way to think about it. We're going to have to learn that our strength as a democracy is the fact of our openness and self-criticism. So I think David's point on that is absolutely essential.
And further, you mentioned the BBC. You know, VOA also is in the credibility business. And our audiences grow when we talk honestly about an Abu Ghraib or a Watergate. When we're honest about the problems with the United States and when we are self-analytical, that builds our credibility and allows us to be taken seriously when we're talking about other problems around the world. So I think one of the answers is things like the Voice of America, which is a journalistic organization. It happens to be US funded, and I am a federal official. But the journalists who work for me are journalists. They tell it like it is. They tell it like they see it. And they work in different languages all around the world, and they understand those audiences. But they use the old-fashioned tools of journalism. The goals of objectivity and balance are absolutely the tools that they use. That builds credibility, and I think there's a lot of things that a Voice of America can do that perhaps the State Department can't.
There's one more thing I would argue, Richard, in answer to your question of how do you deal with this. We've got to be careful not to let too much of a gap develop between our rhetoric and our performance. It's great to talk about human rights and democracy, we're all for it. But when you preach it and then you don't or can't always follow through, you may actually get a rebound that's worse than if you were a little bit more moderate in your initial tone. It's not a new problem. The book I'm going to talk about at breakfast tomorrow morning, Presidential Leadership, has a case about Woodrow Wilson. One of the things about Woodrow Wilson is his 14 points in his Making the World Safe for Democracy made him enormously popular with the publics in Europe. He was wildly popular. But when he wasn't able to follow through with the League of Nations, it led to strong reaction against it and the isolationism of the 1930s. So we obviously need to stand for democracy and human rights. That's who we are. But when you overdo it and then you can't follow through, you expose yourself to hypocrisy. And if there's one thing that's a solvent or something that erodes credibility, it's hypocrisy.
I think that for clarity's sake, I think we need to divide things up a little bit into what are kind of official government statements that are made either by the president or the secretary or the person at the podium. Then I think there are also the kinds of things that David was talking about where government-funded organizations actually talk about something that has to do with American policy, and the policy I think is appropriate to be critical of. Then I think that there is a lower level of kind of social media that is practiced. I mean, Secretary Clinton wanted to have Twitter out there. And then there is all this other stuff. And then finally, I think there is the person who takes it upon himself to decide that he is God-given to reveal a bunch of secrets. And so I think that it's important to kind of subdivide it. Also, a little bit the history of this. Woodrow Wilson would be turning over in his grave many times, but one about he didn't want secret agreements secretly arrived at. It's one thing to say that and then have everybody actually know. A lot of foreign policy is gossip. A lot of what goes on is you, in fact, are reporting as an ambassador or somebody, you're reporting what X said about Y, which is, you know, I really like Joe, but I don't like his red shirt today. You would not want to have that out publicly. But I think that that's the kind of thing that happens, and so that's very damaging to diplomacy. What is not damaging is the kind of, I don't know what you call it, permitted, but also truthful kind of information that's out there. And even that third layer, it's the fourth and fifth, they're the ones that are harder to deal with. And so we need information. Our societies are based on information, and democracy is based on information. Information is power. And the way that the authoritarians control their people is by not giving them information. So we have to give people information, but it's a matter of how to do it.
Let's pivot a little bit here to economic statecraft. I mean, we have a reasonably strong economy compared to the rest of the world. It is recovering. We're known for our entrepreneurship. How do we marshal these resources, both in the government and outside the government, to achieve sustainable outcomes that we would like?
Can I go? I mean, one of the things that I actually was asked to do by Secretary Clinton, President Obama gave a speech in Cairo about having different relationships with Muslim majority countries. Secretary Clinton wanted to do more with that, and so she asked me to run something called Partners for a New Beginning, which are public-private partnerships in Muslim-majority countries, really using the power of the private sector to operate with the public sector in order to, as we've talked about what's going on in the Arab world, a lot of it had to do with people not having jobs. So what we're trying to do is do economic empowerment, science and technology, education, and people-to-people exchanges are the vertical pillars, and the horizontal ones are about how to get women and youth involved. Now, in order to have it be interactive, we have an American steering committee, but what we have are local chapters in all the countries that we're participating in, which allows that kind of interaction of what the people on the ground want and uses the private sector and the economic tools in a way to economically empower people.
David, well, go ahead. When you were in Kabul, did you have, I mean, how did we employ economic statecraft there?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I was quite popular because I had quite a lot of money to give out. But the area I worked in was communications and public diplomacy. And we were looking for, I used to say I was in the hope business. And I was trying to create a sense of hope among the 65% of the population of Afghanistan that were under the age of 25. And we did that in my particular part of the embassy by funding everything from communications towers to expand mobile phone coverage and bring whole parts of the country from the 16th or 14th century to the 21st, to radio and television equipment and reach, antennae, to television programs that perhaps were about the Army, reality TV about the Army. We had a cop show on one of the stations that showed people, at least in fictional form, what it's like in a country where the police enforce the law. Novel concept for Afghanistan in some ways. So we were using a lot of different kinds of communications tools to try to build a sense of hope for young people. And I think we won't know for years how much impact that had, but I am less pessimistic about Afghanistan and its future than the way it seems in the media people are thinking it will be, or at least that the media is thinking it's going to be. It'll be a mess, but I think it'll make its way.
Let me say a word about foreign aid, as long as we're talking about economic instruments. It's probably the least popular program the government has in terms of overseas programs. And the American people wildly exaggerate how much they think we spend on it. They also think of it as just a giveaway to other countries. Most of our foreign aid is actually for leverage on security issues. For example, the panel that Madeleine and Richard Haas was on this morning was very explicitly about, if you're going to deal with Egypt, this is a lever. And so that's one dimension of aid. Another dimension is security support for military training and development in countries that are allies. Another dimension is the dimension where we try to gain soft power, where we try to attract people. It's actually the smaller part of the budget overall. And there, I think what I've seen of studies of foreign aid, and I believe Rajiv Shah understands this and is trying to do something about it, is smaller projects which are owned by the local communities are the most effective in winning over people and developing soft power. The problem is all too often you hire a contractor to put out a lot of money. By September 30th, they haven't spent it all, it goes back. And those large projects often are counterproductive. I've seen some studies showing that, in fact, some of the projects in Afghanistan of that latter type were actually not gaining us soft power, but destroying it. Whereas some of the smaller, more targeted programs were more effective. So I think as we talk about economic tools in the toolbox, we've got to make sure we don't measure it by total numbers of dollars spent, but by the purpose and the type of program and how it affects the country working in.
So let's go a little bit from the hypothetical to a real-world situation. Iran, a regime that we don't have diplomatic relations with, very authoritarian government. And sort of let's go back a couple of years. I mean, we're at the point now where we're publicly talking about red lines and the use of hard power. Does soft power work in a situation like that? How could it work?
Well, I do think that it's more the smart power.
Right.
I have to say this kind of combination, first of all, they do, in an interesting way, the Iranian population is more kind of porous and educated than people think. It's not a completely closed society. And so I think they hear a lot of the kinds, people know now how to tune in to what they need to hear. Also, many of them have had foreign educations and have gone back, so I think we need to understand Iranian society better. There also have been a variety of different kinds of contacts. For me, Iran is a perfect example of having to use everything in the toolbox. And what we do in my class is try, everybody has their favorite tool, that not to give away the end of the class, but we end up saying every tool, you have to syncopate them and use them. And the other part of economic power, we talked about the carrots, which is the aid, they're the sticks. And I happen to think that the sanctions that we've had on Iran have actually had a positive effect. I think they led to the election of Rouhani because people were beginning to see some of the effects of the economy having gone south and wondering about where that was going to go. So it's kind of using that aspect of it. I do think, first of all, it isn't as if nobody talks to Iranians.
No, I know.
And I think we kind of act as if that's, and also I have to say, in 1998 when Khatami was elected, we began to deal with the Iranians in a number of different ways. The question is how the signals get received and what is the backup to the kind of possibilities. But for me, Iran, I would not take any tool off the table. I think part of the problem when you're a policymaker and you just up front take certain tools off the table, there are not a lot of tools in that toolbox. And therefore, all of a sudden removing one doesn't mean you're going to use it, but I think you need to have it. And sometimes you use the threat of the force for diplomacy, and sometimes you use diplomacy in order to deploy force. So you need to kind of use them all together.
I mentioned a moment ago that 1 in 5 adults in Iran watches VOA television every week. How many people realize that that's the kind of conversation we're already having? It has a profound impact, I believe, on the way Iranians view the world. And I think that we now, I was listening to panels earlier, I'm hoping that we can do some programming that gets Iranians thinking about where they're headed with this nuclear policy and what the implications of it are and how serious a matter it will be next year if we still don't have some kind of an agreement. I think that's an obligation of any journalist, including the ones that work for me, is to clarify that for people. And I hope that is what's going to happen. What we're doing at VOA towards Iran is we're basically exporting the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. We're giving them a free press whether they like it or not, and the government doesn't like it, but the people do.
I agree with what both what Madeleine and Edward said. The soft power doesn't solve all problems, and stopping the mullah's bomb, I think, is not going to be accomplished by soft power. But it does help if the younger generation find the U.S. attractive rather than unattractive. It puts a little bit more pressure on the system. And I'm always struck that, if you take a lot of American soft power, it's produced not by the government, but by our civil society, everything from our universities to Hollywood. And if you take an American film which shows a woman wearing a bikini and working as a lawyer and then divorcing her husband if he's brutal, and you show that in Iran, the mullahs absolutely hate it. This is the great Satan. But there's nothing more that the younger generation in Iran wants than a video of that film. And that's part of our strength, which is, as you said, it's not just exporting the First Amendment, it's also showing a broader vision of the world.
I think also cultural diplomacy is very important, and you cannot underestimate the role of music, American music. I know in Central and Eastern Europe, jazz made all the difference. In Czechoslovakia, they began as jazz and developed into a political movement. And so in many ways, our best ambassadors are musicians and various other parts of our culture, which is definitely soft power and most really attractive part. And it can't be, so to speak, exactly programmed, but I think it makes a huge impression in terms of the popularity of America, as Joe said.
Let's take another excursion to a current real-world situation, Egypt. I mean, it started out with a lot of hope. It appears to be collapsing. What do we do there? I mean, what tools do we use there? Obviously, hard power is pretty much out. I mean, it's all soft power in the context of smart power.
Well, using foreign aid as leverage, I would argue, is a form of hard power. I mean, if hard power is carrots and sticks, withdrawing aid is a stick. Sanctions are sticks, and drawing aid is a type of sanction. I think that we're not going to solve the problems of Egypt. Egyptians are. And I think it's going to be a long-term revolutionary situation. What we can try to do is express values that we think are important and try to use what levers we have for those, but also through our own behavior, illustrate what those values mean. And I think it's a modest toolbox because, frankly, we don't have a big enough toolbox to solve the problems of what's going on in Egypt today. But if we realize that that doesn't mean we have no tools, and therefore can use some hard and some soft to the extent we can, that's probably the right way to approach it.
I think Egypt is a perfect example of where we have a communications problem. We talked about it a little bit this morning, but what I think the issue is that all of a sudden, thanks to social media, a lot of individual voices have been loosed so that people can, in fact, express their views. And one of the ways that we've talked about this is that the population is communicating in 21st century technology. The government is listening to it in 20th century technology and responding to it with 19th century technology. And so that, all of a sudden, there are all these, I mean, we saw this morning the kind of frustration of somebody who was speaking very vividly in terms of things that were needed, and it's just not being heard. And therefore, that creates frustration and additional chaos. And so I think that our systems haven't gotten their heads around what's going on. I'm also chairman of the board of the National Democratic Institute. We just had a conference out in Silicon Valley to try to figure out how technology has affected democracy. And it's obviously democratized a lot of things, but it has created this disconnect about what you hear, what you don't hear, what the receptor is here.
Okay, let's shift a little bit. Madeleine, you teach a course. What are the critical skills? I mean, presumably some of the people you teach are going to be the future diplomats, professional diplomats. What are the most critical skills that diplomats need today, and are these things that can be taught?
I think diplomats need to have large ears. Our president does. I think people need to listen. I think that is the hardest part, is that we're always on transmit. And so what I really do think is diplomats, the art of diplomacy is putting yourself into the other person's shoes, because not everything has to be a zero-sum game. And in order to have that skill, being able to do that, you do have to hear what they are saying and try to figure out what their national interests are, which also then means that you have to have a very good understanding of the history, the culture, and I believe, and I wrote a book about this, the religion of that other country, and really be a good listener. And also then be able to articulate your own policies. But I honestly think if you can't listen, you don't belong in the diplomatic service.
There is a book, I think, by Harold Nicholson called Diplomacy, which was a sort of a textbook for what I call Diplomacy 1.0, 19th century style diplomacy. He defined a diplomat as a man, note the gender, who is sent abroad to lie for his country. That is distinctly not the case for 21st century diplomacy. Being able to present your country, to present things openly, to be self-critical is going to be absolutely crucial. And I think in that sense, that in teaching young people, as Madeleine said, listening, understanding the other culture, hearing how they see a problem, not just telling them how we see it, are going to be absolutely crucial for effective diplomacy. And I think that in that sense, if you say, what do you want to train them in? I think they need to do more language, literature, regional studies, really understand other cultures, and then get in the mode of realizing that in an information age, you have to be able to have two-way communication. It's not just broadcast, it's receive as well.
And if you're talking about communication, we, for example, have a show in Russian called Podelis, which is broadcast on the internet because Mr. Putin doesn't want us on TV stations in his country. But we can get through anyway on the internet, and it is the audience that decides each week what the subject will be the following week. And we get experts in, and we have conversations in Russian on whatever topic the audience there wants to hear about. And that's the kind of a program that is pulling in a young audience in Russia, and they can have a quite heated debate on Podelis with no holds barred, whereas on Russian state television, all kinds of holds are barred. And you can't really have a broad conversation about things. So we're creating a place for conversation between Americans and Russians. And I think that's quite powerful. And that's a great adjunct to American diplomacy.
This is not going to be in Harold Nicholson or in any book, but you also have to be able to eat for your country. Because there is nothing harder than being at a state dinner and you're trying to push the food around and the head of state looks at you and says, "Why aren't you eating our national whatever?" And then you have to eat it. So you do have to do that too.
Yeah. It's a tough job.
But is this really happening? I mean, what's the sense of the group about, is this really happening with our diplomats now, or is this something that is going to take years and years and years to sort of unfold when the international environment and communications technology is sort of unfolding at internet speed?
Well, I train a certain number of young people every year in my course at the Kennedy School who then go on into the Foreign Service. These people are absolutely first rate. They're fully understanding of what an information age is. And I think the young Foreign Service officers I've met, not just young ones, but the Foreign Service officers I've met, are an extraordinarily dedicated group of people. So I'm enormously impressed. I'm less impressed by the bureaucratic system that manages them.
I have to say, I think our young people are amazing. I'm sure this is true in your classes, Joe, but at a certain stage, half my class raise their hands when they speak Arabic, the others speak Chinese. It really is quite a remarkable group. I think it is important to say something. Diplomacy is not a glamorous job these days. I think that we owe a great debt of gratitude to our diplomats who, in fact, are out there in very, very dangerous situations, and they are not people that just go to receptions, and so it's not one of those cushy kind of jobs. I know the young people that I have, and then the middle level that come in, it's tough. And when I was secretary, there were more stars on the wall at the State Department than at the Pentagon at that particular time. And so, having brought bodies back, I can just tell you that people need to know that diplomacy is a very tough form of work these days.
One of the diplomats in the office in Kabul that I used to lead died not long ago, Anne Smednikov, a young, superb Foreign Service officer, and she died because she was out delivering school books to children that we had caused to be published in Dari and Pashto. She was making a huge difference, and her life was in danger, clearly, in doing so. So just a superb person, a remarkable American diplomat.
If I could add a footnote to that, if you look at the budget of the State Department, and in particularly if you look at the public diplomacy budget of the State Department, it is a pauper's budget. It would be worth about, I'm a former Assistant Secretary of Defense, so don't get me wrong, but what we spend on public diplomacy is probably what we spend in a day or two in the Pentagon. I mean, if this is a new world, our Congress has got to understand that they've got to appropriate accordingly.
Yeah, can I just pile on there? Depending on whose numbers you use, Chinese officials themselves have said that between 2009 and 10, they spent somewhere between $7 and $9 billion on CCTV, Xinhua, and China Daily. Enormous gleaming new studios and bureaus built all over the world to project Chinese satellite television to the world. I'm not saying that that's going to be successful or that we should spend dollar for dollar what they did, because frankly, I don't think their ideas are as appealing as ours. I don't think their soft power is as appealing as ours. But I don't think we're in the game at the moment. This does require some funding. Even in a time when we're pulling back, we should be spending more on soft power.
We're going to go to questions in a minute. Can I ask the staff to set up the microphones on either side? If you've got a question, please line up. One final question before we go to the audience. Are there lots of countries that are better at this soft power game than we are?
Well, there's a poll that was taken recently in Britain, which last year we were the best in the country, best in the world. This year, Britain outranked us. May have had something to do with the Olympics being in Britain last year. But if you look at consistently over time when polls have been taken, not by Americans, but by other countries, the Americans still rank number one.
Okay, questions? Who's got a question?
Here's one over here, Rich.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Rudi Lenz, and I work for Aspen Institute in Germany. I was working for 20 years for Deutsche Welle, which is sort of the voice of America. And I'd like to remind the public here about the success we had, and I absolutely agree with David. This is one of the best tools we have in the toolbox. Why is that so? If we remind the Cold War, it was Deutsche Welle, it was Voice of America, it was Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe, which over time helped to begin the process of CSCE, which was so instrumental and so important to bring down the Soviet Empire. That should be a lesson for the future, and I absolutely agree with what Joe said and David as well. We need more power behind that power before we do it, and it could become a second success story. But my question to the panel is, aren't we sometimes too impatient with that sort of toolbox? Because it takes time. And sometimes I think we overburden it with expectations and think that this toolbox can work easily and bring results very quickly. And I think that is not so.
Well, none of the tools work very fast. I think that is part of the problem. And we're living in a super speed kind of society, and people expect quick answers. The thing that I find interesting in terms of thinking about, what is the difference between propaganda and public diplomacy? And I think that the difference is the two-way dialogue, so that it isn't just a matter of emitting the American or the Russian or the Chinese message. It's having that mechanism for getting the answers back. And then the question is how you measure what the answers are. But I don't think anything is quick. We all want answers very quickly, and I think there's no tool except a bomb that actually is rapid, and if you do the bomb, there are unintended consequences that you have to deal with the other tools later.
But the other difference with propaganda, I mean, I had a congressman say to me not too long ago, why aren't you tougher on the Ayatollah? You know, why aren't your broadcasts not harder on the Ayatollah? And I said, Congressman, the best answer to propaganda is not more propaganda, it's truth. We're in the truth business, we're in the credibility business, and over time, that's what brought down communism. And that's what can help America to persevere with its ideas and convince others to do what we want them to do. It has the best chance. But you've got to have truth on your side.
Yeah, but Rudy's right. It does take time, and very often people who are spending dollars or appropriating want quick results. And the idea that it might take a decade is that they're not going to be elected in a decade. But there is, I think, the best answer to this question about propaganda is that a young Czech student that I quote in one of my books. He's gone to the Salzburg seminar in Austria, and after 2 weeks of being in this seminar, where they argued back and forth with the Americans and others, he said, the best propaganda is not propaganda. Which I think is something we should take to heart.
I thank you for a wonderful panel. It's so great to hear from the person who created the term and then two such great practitioners. I want to bring the subject back to Egypt, which seems appropriate since today so many people in that country are out on the streets. But to me, it is disturbing that those people on the streets who are fighting against what they perceive to be authoritarianism in this current government, elected, absolutely elected, but nonetheless ruling with an iron fist, which, as we heard this morning, Egyptians just aren't going to take anymore. Those people, even though they're fighting for ideas and ideals that are associated, I think, generally with the United States, they do not see the United States as their friend and ally. Quite the opposite. They see the United States government generally and the ambassador specifically in Egypt as their enemy. And I wonder if this doesn't have some consequences for America's leadership in the world, even for security. Because if we're not going to succeed through hard power, fighting wars, we have all the ability to succeed through soft power. But this is, I think, a kind of scary failure in that respect. So I wonder what you think about that.
Go ahead.
Well, I agree with the premise that we really do have to think about how the next generation sees us. If you go back to the prior question, that if you think over a longer term, being aligned with the aspirations of that generation is important. There are lots of reasons why we have trouble. I mean, President Obama went to Cairo and made a very good speech in June of 2009, but many Egyptians and others feel that American policy hasn't caught up with what was in the speech. And that leads to a certain sense of disappointment. And you can see that in the public opinion polls. Our polls in the area went up after the speech. They're down now lower than they were. But there is a decision which President Obama made, which took a lot of guts, which was at the time of Tahrir Square, was he going to try to preserve Mubarak or not? And the decision he made of not standing by Mubarak, which some people wanted him to do, was because of the question that you raised, to being aligned with what he saw as the next generation and the forces of history. So some decisions have worked better than others, but I would think that in general we should be trying to think about, in a revolutionary situation, which I fear we're going to see for another decade or two in the region, keeping your eye on the longer term future and not just on the immediate popularity is probably important.
I think the thing that we have to remember here is, in many ways, this is, I mean, if you're the United States, you're damned if you do or damned if you don't. And do you, there are a lot of people that I would put in the liberal category who have come up to me and said, what a mistake it was not to support Mubarak. Now we have the Muslim Brotherhood. It was not our story. And I think the bottom line is that we do have to be patient with this. The other part that I think And again, Joe, you had talked about kind of the machinery of how the government has certain responsibilities that various interest groups do not have. And the question is, how do you work the whole will of the United States in order to respond to something? And it's not easy. I think that people that are our ambassadors to particular countries have a responsibility actually to work with the government that is there. There has to be some communication. And so, and I remember when I was secretary, I can honestly say, without being overly self-centered, that I probably was as good a secretary on human rights as one can be. But the bottom line is I had human rights organizations coming in saying, why aren't you you have to do better on this and you have to do better on that. And I said, your job is to keep telling me I have to do better, and my job is to determine what is in U.S. national interest. And I think people have to see it from that perspective. We cannot win every popularity poll. It's nice, but we can't do it every time, I think.
David, did you want to say anything? No. I'd be crazy not to recognize my wife.
Thank you. I wasn't gonna disclose, not to embarrass you, honey. But seriously, as I worked for Secretary Clinton, I had the privilege of working for Secretary Clinton as head of the Global Entrepreneurship Program up until about 3 months ago, which was not in the public diplomacy group at State, but in our economics bureau. That said, one of the areas you haven't commented on, I'd like your reaction to, is the role of the private sector in us deploying, in the United States deploying our smart power strategy. We in the Global Entrepreneurship Program had over 100 private sector partners. We work closely with Partners for New Beginning and Tony Verstanding, who's amazing, here at Aspen. And we certainly saw that as a critical role. None of you have commented on the private sector's role in helping us get the job done.
Well, I feel very strongly about it. Let me just say, when I first became secretary, I was asked to come out, believe it or not, by John Chambers to Silicon Valley to talk about how the government and the private sector might work together. Those people there all of a sudden said, what are you doing for us? Why should we work with you? I said, well, actually, you do need the public sector in order to work through regulations and market access. And I may put in more economic advisors at our various embassies in order to do that. The terrifying part to people is that you actually learn something while you're Secretary of State. And when I traveled, I used to go and I'd always give speeches at AmCham, and they were huge audiences and I learned nothing. And therefore I decided that it would be useful to meet with representatives of American corporations abroad, and they had a kind of a different understanding of what was going on, and I thought that the input from the private sector was very important. We then decided that the best kind of way of encouraging private sector activity abroad was to explain to American corporations that being good local citizens was something that promoted their bottom line, but also values in a number of ways. So I created a prize to make that happen. I do think that the private and public sector is the way to get things done these days, because we have an incredible private sector. The public sector can't do everything. People have spoken about budgets. That has something to do with it. And it is the warp and woof of America. We believe in the role of the private sector and the free market, and kind of having that relationship. And the Partners for a New Beginning is just one example of it. But I think it's absolutely essential, and we need to do more to mobilize the private sector to work with the public sector.
We have another question.
Okay, over here.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about Syria and what you thought about the role that we're playing, and if there's any kind of power, hard, soft, smart, that can be effective there and work to some kind of resolution.
Do you have a Syrian answer? I will stick my head in the noose. I think before you act on anything like Syria, you have to remember the Hippocratic Oath, which is, first of all, do no harm. We have to understand what actions we could take which would actually make things better. Bad as Assad is, one thing that would be worse is a Hobbesian war of all against all among sectarian communities, with Christians and Alawites and Shia and Sunnis and Kurds all killing each other, with in the end of that, the result being let's say, an Al-Qaeda type regime in charge. So you can imagine worse things. That doesn't mean you do nothing, but it does mean that the argument that just rush in, you've got to know that you're going to make it better. I think what President Obama is doing in terms of arms is correct. I think that we should also be continuing to press for negotiations, even though it doesn't look promising because of the Russians. I think we should be trying also to work with the regions in the allies and other countries in the region to see if you could have a force that, if you ever got the prospects for a ceasefire or an intervention, could go in and prevent that kind of bloodbath that I described. So there are a lot of things that we could be doing in preparation. I didn't mention the refugees, but that's another big part of what we're doing and could do more of. So what I'm saying is don't do nothing. What I'm saying is when somebody says we should just go in and clean the place up, I'm not convinced we know how to do it.
Over here, sir.
Thank you very much. Saeed Jawad from Afghanistan. Madam Secretary, you've indicated the significance of knowing the culture of a country where a diplomat is serving. During the time that I served here as ambassador, the United States sends 4 ambassadors to Kabul. So by the time they were getting to know people and their way around Kabul, they were being reassigned. We would be very lucky to have people like David, who served in Afghanistan for more than 6 months. And we have Afghan-American diplomats here in Washington who are serving in Argentina and Indonesia. So is there a time to reconsider the issue of rotation of the diplomats and allow them to focus in a country or on an issue for long term to develop the necessary expertise and know the culture of the countries that they are interested to serve in, or it's of interest to the United States? Thank you.
Well, I think generally, let me just say that the United States has always had a policy of creating generalists and of having people that are able to serve in a number of places. We've gone back and forth sometimes with creating regional experts, and then we change our minds about it. One of the problems with having somebody stay in a country too long is what we call clientitis, and that they forget what the other side of the story is. On the other hand, with so many different languages, it does create a problem when you move people around a lot. And the question is how to get kind of a balance of having people that understand the culture and the language and the religion. But also, some of these are very hardship posts, and people need to move out for some kind of personal reasons. It's my only way of explaining it, but it certainly is a problem. If somebody arrives, they figure out where the bathroom is, and then it's time to go.
No. Ambassador, you're right. There was too much turnover at the embassy in Kabul, and I wish we could have had longer stays, but it was a hardship post. You couldn't bring your family, and families don't wait. So people were rotated after a year. I did, as you said, a little bit longer than that, but it's a disadvantage for Afghanistan and for the United States. The tours are so short, but there were pretty good reasons for it, understandable reasons, let's put it that way.
We got time for one final question. One final question over here.
So I recently have taken the Foreign Service test, and I'm waiting on my results right now. So my question focuses more on the bureaucratic organization of the State Department. So how would you say the bureaucratic organization, not just in the State Department, but in the entire foreign policy bureaucracy, affects the implementation of smart power? And then how would you see this organization changing going forward to meet the new climate of the international diplomacy?
Well, it's one person who ought to answer that.
Yeah. Over to you.
No. Well, first of all, I hope you go into the Foreign Service. I think it is a great life and a great job, and I think that you will find it very interesting. But let me make the following point. It's very interesting because it's not easy to run, as we call it, the building. And partially, it is a bureaucracy like any other. There are people there who have been there for a long time. Then there are the political appointees who bring a whole other level of information and interest to their jobs. But what I found as the most complicating part of running the building was it used to be that the civil servants that came in were primarily support staff, people that were there in support. And then all of a sudden, as foreign policy got more complicated, and you needed to have expertise on the environment or science or some particular thing, so that civil servants were brought in at higher levels in order to be the experts. And there still is this kind of dichotomy between the Foreign Service and the civil service. And I think that's the part of the bureaucracy that I disliked the most, frankly. And then also, I think there is sometimes a difference between those who have been there a long time and those who are new. I had to say, when I left government, by the way, in case it's not clear to anybody, I loved being Secretary of State. And what... But
I think we loved you.
But I said to people, I am so jealous that you get to do this forever and my time is over. And then I'm going to say something that's not diplomatic. And then I thought about the diplomats who had to work for me and then had to work for a Republican. And so how do you decide? How do you do it? Condi Rice and I had the same education from my father. We just learned different things. So I think that, but I think it is very hard if you have any kind of political views, how it is that you are there serving as a diplomat. And I do think that is part of the bureaucratic aspect.
And if I could add, since I made a critical comment about the bureaucracy, if you get into the Foreign Service, do it.
And with that, let's give our panelists a round of applause. And thanks very much.